Hi dearest viewers, how are you doing today? What if one secret word could open a cave filled with unimaginable treasure? But the moment you speak it, 40 ruthless thieves begin hunting you. In a dusty desert village, a poor woodcutter stumbles upon a hidden fortune that could change his life forever. But riches come with a deadly price. Because once the secret is discovered, there's no escape from the shadows, watching, waiting, ready to strike. This is not just a story about treasure. It's a story about greed, betrayal, and a secret that kills. The story unfolds like this. Long ago, in a land of golden deserts and bustling bazaars, there lived two brothers, Ali Baba and Kasim. Kasim was wealthy, married to a rich woman, and lived in a grand house filled with silks and jewels. Ali Baba, however, was poor. He lived in a small hut with his kind wife and earned his living by cutting firewood in the forest. One day, while Ali Baba was gathering wood, he heard the sound of galloping horses. He lunged for the nearest gnarled oak, digging his fingers into the rough bark and hauling himself upward. He scrambled into the dense canopy, pressing his spine against the trunk, forcing his breathing to shallow, silent intervals. Below, the brush snapped. 40 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses lathered in sweat, hooves churning the dirt into a thick, choking haze. They moved with a singular, predatory purpose, cutting through the trees until they reached the base of a jagged, sheer cliff. Ali Baba watched from the branches, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood. The riders pulled their mounts to a halt, the sudden silence ringing louder than their arrival. The leader dismounted, his boots crunching on the stone, and turned to face the solid wall of rock. Ali Baba held his breath, eyes fixed on the cliff. He stepped forward until his chest was inches from the sheer rock and did not look back at his men. He raised his chin, his voice cutting through the stagnant air with absolute authority.
Open Sesame.
The command rang out, bouncing off the cliff face and vibrating through the trees. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a grinding sound erupted from the earth, a deep, tectonic groan that shook the branches of the oak tree. The solid stone face began to slide, not outward, but inward, retreating into the mountain with the heavy friction of stone against stone. Ali Baba leaned forward, his balance precarious on the branch. As the gap widened, a golden light spilled out, reflecting off the dust motes. It was not just a cave, it was a vault. Piles of coins rose like dunes in a desert, mixed with heavy bars and flowered vessels. Ali Baba remained pinned to the tree, his mouth slightly open, his mind struggling to process the sight. He did not move, he did not breathe. The riders did not return. Minutes stretched into an hour, the forest settling back into its natural, indifferent rhythm. Ali Baba finally shifted his weight, his muscles stiff and aching from the long, rigid weight. He climbed down, his boots finding purchase on the gnarled roots until he hit the forest floor. He moved toward the cliff, his pace slow, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The stone wall remained partially ajar, a jagged, dark mouth in the mountainside. He reached the threshold, the air here cooler. He took a steadying breath, gripped his hands into tight fists, and whispered the words.
Open Sesame.
The rock groaned again, sliding fully aside to reveal the vast, hollow interior. Ali Baba stepped across the threshold. He looked up. The floor was a sea of gold. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of a gold bar. It was real. Ali Baba reached his home and dumped the heavy sacks onto the packed dirt floor. The sound was unmistakable, a metallic clatter that echoed against the mud walls. His wife dropped her work, her eyes widening as she stared at the pile of gold. She did not ask where it came from. She grabbed a scale, desperate to know the extent of their fortune. She realized the scale was too small for such a task, and hurried to the house of Ali Baba's brother, Kasim. She knocked, breathless, and asked to borrow a weight. Kasim's wife opened the door, her gaze sharp and calculating. She handed over the scale, but her suspicion lingered. As soon as the door closed, she pressed a thick layer of wax onto the bottom of the metal pan. She waited, watching the street with narrowed eyes. When Ali Baba's wife returned the scale, Kasim's wife was hurried to take it back and check the bottom of scale pan. Kasim's wife took the scale back. Her fingers immediately searched the wax. She pulled it away, and there, embedded firmly in the sticky surface, was a single, gleaming gold coin. She held it up to the light, her breath hitching as she realized the source of this sudden, impossible wealth. Kasim immediately went to his brother's house and did not wait for an invitation. He kicked the door open, his face flushed with a dark, vibrating intensity. He strode into the center of the room, his eyes scanning the floor where the gold had been quickly hidden. He stopped, his slippers grinding into the dirt, and reached into his palm. He slammed the gold coin down onto the wooden table. It spun, a bright, taunting circle of light that seemed to fill the small room. Ali Baba stood by the wall, his hands instinctively clenching into fists. Kasim stepped forward, closing the distance until his breath was hot against Ali Baba's face. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a raw, desperate hunger. He pointed at the coin, then at the floor, his voice dropping to a jagged, threatening growl.
I know you have more. I know where you found it.
Ali Baba tried to turn away, but Kasim grabbed his shoulder, spinning him back with a violent shove. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. He leaned in, his voice dripping with malice. Ali Baba looked at his brother, seeing only the hollow, glinting greed.
Tell me the location, or I will ensure you never walk these streets again.
The next morning, the sun had barely cleared the horizon when Kasim reached the jagged cliff. He stood before the solid stone face, his chest breathing with anticipation. He shouted the command, his voice cracking against the silence of the canyon. The rock groaned, a deep, grinding sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots.
Open sesame.
As the stone slid aside, a cool, stale draft rushed out to meet him. Kasim did not hesitate. He ran into the opening, his eyes widening as the dim light caught the shimmer of endless gold. The cave was a sea of coins, stacked in uneven mounds that reached toward the ceiling. He fell to his knees, his hands clawing at the piles of jewels. The metal slipped through his fingers like water. He stood up, his mind racing with calculations of weight and value. He dragged 12 donkeys into the cavern, one by one, their hooves clattering sharply against the stone floor. He worked with a frantic, sweating intensity, shoveling gold into heavy sacks and hoisting them onto the animals' backs. He was so consumed by the weight of the loot and the intoxicating glint of the gems that he failed to notice the change in the air. The entrance remained open, but the silence of the desert outside had shifted. He was blind to the world, his focus entirely locked on the fortune he believed was now his own. Kasim wiped the sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. He grabbed the lead rope of the final donkey, his muscles aching from the exertion of filling the last sack. He turned toward the entrance, expecting to see the path back to the desert. Instead, he saw only the solid, unyielding wall of stone. He frowned, his heart giving a sharp, sudden jolt. He stepped forward, placing his palms against the cold rock, and pushed. It did not budge. He stepped back, his breath hitching in his throat. He cleared his lungs and shouted. The words echoed hollowly against the cavern walls, swallowed by the silence of the gold.
Open wheat.
He waited, his eyes darting to the ceiling, then to the floor. Nothing moved. A cold sweat broke out across his skin. He lunged at the stone again, his fingernails scraping against the granite. He screamed, his voice cracking with rising terror.
Open barley.
He began to pace, his boots kicking up dust, his mind spinning in a frantic, desperate loop. He tried every grain, every plant, every word he could conjure, but the stone remained a tomb. The weight of the gold suddenly felt like a mountain pressing down on his chest. He was trapped. Kasim hammered his fists against the rock, his knuckles bleeding. He was sobbing now, a ragged sound that bounced off the piles of gold. He spun around, searching for another exit, but the walls were solid. Then he felt it. A low, rhythmic tremor traveled through the floor, vibrating up through his boots. He froze, head cocked toward the entrance. Outside, the muffled thunder of hooves grew louder, sharper, cutting through the desert air. He scrambled toward the stone, hoping to hear a signal that the path was clear. But the sound was not retreating, it was converging. The thudding intensified until the very air in the cavern seemed to rattle. He realized with a jolt of pure terror that he was not alone. He scrambled behind a mound of silver, his breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. The horses stopped abruptly. A chorus of harsh, guttural voices erupted just beyond the rock. The leader shouted a command. The stone groaned, grinding against the earth as it began to slide open. A sliver of blinding daylight pierced the darkness, cutting across the cavern floor. Kasim pressed himself into the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The thieves did not hesitate. They surged forward, blades drawn, cutting off any path to the exit. Kasim lunged for the gap between them, but a heavy boot caught his chest, sending him sprawling back into the gold. He scrambled to his feet, hands raised, but the leader stepped forward with a single, brutal motion. The cavern fell silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the men. They left the body where it fell, uninterested in the man. Hours later, the desert sun dipped low, casting long, jagged shadows across the cliff face. Ali Baba arrived, his heart heavy. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the gloom until they landed on the center of the room. He walked slowly, his boots crunching on stray coins. He stopped. The sight of his brother, still and cold amidst the stolen wealth, drained the color from his face. He knelt, reaching out to touch a shoulder. The gold, once a dream of prosperity, now glittered with a sickening hollow light. He gathered the heavy, limp form and began the long trek back. Ali Baba reached the threshold, his burden heavy and lifeless. He laid the body down in the dim light of the main room. Panic flickered in his eyes, but Morgiana moved with sharp, decisive purpose. She did not weep, she did not hesitate. She knew that a sudden death in the house would draw the eyes of the neighborhood, and with them, the prying questions of the authorities. She stepped out into the night, moving through the narrow alleys until she found the master tailor. She did not explain. She simply pressed a coin into his hand and bring out a thick, dark cloth. She put black cloth piece on Taylor's eyes, knotting the fabric behind his head. She took Taylor's arm and guided him through the winding streets, forcing him to turn at every corner to disorient his sense of direction. Once inside the house, she stood over the tailor as he worked, her presence a silent, watchful shadow. He stitched the shroud with trembling fingers. When the task was finished, she blindfolded him once more and led him back. She watched him walk away, then returned to the house, locking the door. The thieves were not finished. News of the tailor reached the ears of the gang, confirming that someone had retrieved the body. The leader knew the house had to be identified. He sent his most trusted scout into the city under the cover of a moonless night. The man moved through the labyrinth of alleys, his eyes scanning every lintel and doorframe. He found the house, paused to ensure no one was watching, and drew a piece of white chalk across the wood. He made a sharp, distinct cross, then vanished into the darkness. Morgiana was at the gate moments later, checking the perimeter before locking up for the night. She saw the white streak against the dark wood. She did not panic. She did not call out to Ali Baba. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her own piece of chalk, and turned to the street. She walked to the neighbor on the left and drew an identical cross. She moved to the next house, then the next, marking every door in the row. By the time she finished, the street was a uniform line of identical symbols. She stepped back, wiped the chalk dust from her fingers, and retreated inside. The gang arrived before dawn, their movements synchronized and silent. They moved down the street, expecting to find the single white cross that would lead them to their vengeance. Instead, they stopped dead. Every door in the row bore the exact same mark. The leader stepped forward, his hand hovering over the hilt of his blade, his eyes darting from one door to the next. The marks were identical in size, angle, and height. He turned to his men, his face hardening with frustration. They checked the first house, then the second, then the third, but the uniformity of the signs rendered their reconnaissance useless. The men began to mutter, their confidence eroding. The leader walked the length of the street, his boots crunching against the cobblestones, searching for any subtle difference. There was none. He signaled for them to pull back, his jaw set in a tight, grim line. They melted away into the shadows of the city. The leader shed his identity as a bandit. He traded his weapons for the tools of a merchant. He disguised himself as a trader. He spent days gathering 38 large ceramic jars, heavy and wide-mouthed, and loaded them onto a string of mules. He entered the city gates with his head bowed, projecting the image of a weary, harmless trader. He navigated the streets until he reached the house of Ali Baba. He pulled the mules to a halt and struck the heavy wooden gate. When the gate groaned open, he stood before Ali Baba with a practiced, humble expression. He spoke of a long journey and a need for rest. Ali Baba looked at the man, then at the line of jars, and saw only a traveler in need. He nodded, gesturing for him to enter. The leader guided the animals through the threshold, the heavy jars clattering against the stone. He secured the mules in the corner of the yard. Ali Baba offered him a seat and a cup of water. The leader sat, his hands resting on his knees, watching the house settle into quiet. The house fell into a deep, heavy silence. Morgiana moved through the kitchen, her hands searching for the lamp, but the wick sputtered and died. The vessel was empty. She grabbed a small pitcher and stepped out into the cool air. The moon cast long, jagged shadows across the rows of ceramic jars. She walked toward the first one, the stone cold beneath her fingertips. She leaned in, intending to dip the pitcher, but a low, raspy sound drifted up from the dark mouth of the vessel. It was a human voice, muffled and impatient. The words hung in the stagnant air. Morgiana froze.
Is it time?
She moved to the second jar, pressing her ear against the rough clay. Another voice, deeper this time, hissed from within.
Is it time yet?
Her heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped back, her eyes scanning the long line of 38 containers. Every jar held a killer, waiting for a signal. She stood motionless, the empty pitcher trembling in her grip. Morgiana did not scream. She did not run to wake the house. She turned her movements precise and fluid and retreated to the kitchen. She piled wood into the hearth, striking flint until the flames roared to life. She hoisted a heavy iron cauldron onto the fire, filling it with oil until it reached the brim. She watched the surface. The liquid began to ripple, then hiss, then bubble with a violent, rolling heat. She grabbed a thick cloth to shield her hands and lifted the cauldron. It was heavy, pulling at her shoulders, but she did not falter. She approached the first jar, the one that had spoken. She tilted the cauldron. The boiling oil poured in a steady, thick stream. She worked with a rhythmic, mechanical focus, pouring the scalding liquid into every jar in the line. She set the empty cauldron down on the stone, her chest heaving, and looked at the row of jars. They were quiet. The leader stepped out from the guest quarters, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. He expected to see his men emerging from the jars, the house already under their control. Instead, he found the courtyard bathed in an unnatural, heavy stillness. He walked toward the line of ceramic vessels. The air hung thick with the acrid, biting scent of scorched oil. He reached the first jar and kicked it. It did not shift, it did not groan. He tipped it over, and the contents spilled out onto the stone, a lifeless, charred weight. His eyes darted down the row. Every jar was silent. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He did not call out. He did not search for the one responsible. He backed away, his boots scraping against the uneven ground, his gaze fixed on the dark windows of the house. He turned and sprinted toward the gate. He walked over the threshold, disappearing into the blackness of the alleyway. The courtyard remained empty, save for the row of silent, broken jars. Weeks later, a new merchant arrived at the gate, offering gifts and smooth words. Ali Baba, unaware of the man's true identity, invited him to join the evening meal. The table was set with heavy platters of meat and wine. The guest sat in the place of honor, his eyes scanning the room with predatory patience. Ali Baba and his son laughed at the merchant's stories, oblivious to the danger sitting across from them. Morgiana stood in the shadows near the hearth, her gaze fixed on the visitor. She knew the shape of his jaw and the cold set of his eyes. She stepped into the center of the room, holding a tambourine. She began to move, her feet tapping against the stone floor in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The metal discs of the instrument jingled, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the low hum of conversation. She spun, the fabric of her sleeves catching the light. She moved closer to the table, her eyes never leaving the guest. She circled the room, her pace quickening, the tambourine rising and falling, in time with her breath. She drifted behind the leader, her shadow falling across his shoulders. The music grew louder, filling the space, masking the deliberate, predatory grace of her approach. Jingo's frantic dance, Morgana's final spin. With a sharp, sudden motion, she let the instrument drop. It clattered against the stone floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. Before the metal disc stopped vibrating, her hand darted to her belt. She pulled the dagger free, the steel catching the orange glow of the wall torches. She did not hesitate. She moved forward, driving the blade deep into the trader's chest. The man gasped, his hands flying up to grip the hilt, but his strength failed him instantly. He slumped forward, his face hitting the table with a dull thud, overturning a goblet of wine that bled across the wood. The room went deathly still. Ali Baba pushed his chair back, his breath hitching in his throat as he stared at the fallen man. Morgiana stood over the body, the dagger still gripped in her hand, her chest heaving with the exertion of the strike. Ali Baba looked from the lifeless body to Morgiana. He saw the steady hand that had saved his life and the loyalty that had shielded his home. He walked to the center of the room and bowed his head, a silent acknowledgement of the debt he could never repay. He took her hand and declared her a free woman, no longer a servant, but a member of his own family. The household shifted, the fear that had defined their days gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful order. They returned to the cave one last time to seal the entrance, ensuring the gold would remain buried in the earth. They lived in the house on the hill, surrounded by the comfort of their labor, but they never spoke the command aloud again. The secret remained locked behind the stone, a lesson learned in blood and silence. They thrived on the wisdom of their shared survival.